Hopefully you are now seeing a slide that has my name on it, and we will now officially welcome you to the conference. I think when we started this research, this TiLL project, Teachers Inspiring Lifelong Learning, we started it 3 years ago. And at the time, we felt that it was very important that teachers were equipped with the skills they needed to be able to adapt their teaching and learning in a way that inspires children to themselves become lifelong learners. And this was something at the time we thought it needs to be really looked at in some serious way. And together as a group of partners representing higher education, local education authorities, working in different parts of Europe from school base, it was considered that this was such a vital thing to look at for the future. What we didn't know was what has happened in the last few months, where we've seen a revolution in what teachers have had to do. As all of us have experienced who are in education, within 10 days, teachers had to become 21st century teachers. They had to work in remote ways. They had to learn to manage hybrid learning. They had to completely rethink what it means to be a teacher or a facilitator of learning and how this would operate. People say that it was 10 years of educational change occurred in those 10 days. At the same time, we've seen this issue of teacher reform becoming a really top agenda item with the OECD, with UNESCO, with the European Commission. And so it's very timely. And so our research is very much based on what is the sort of teacher we're going to need when that child who's born today is in school, and when they finish school in 18 years, what sort of teacher, what sort of situation are they going to face? And this was very personal to me at the moment because one of my staff members had her baby last Thursday. So she had a little girl. And so when her daughter is in school, what sort of teacher will she meet in the classroom? To link it to the work of the education, the compass that OECD is working on, the Director of Education and Skills for the OECD, Andreas Schleicher, who I know many of you know, said teachers used to be instructors, but tomorrow teachers will be facilitators, mentors, coaches. We still build our schools like factories. We need to change the work arrangements for teachers. Teachers should have the aspiration and ownership of their own professional standards. Teachers must be the agents of their own lifelong learning. The pupils won't be lifelong learners if the teachers themselves are not lifelong learners. Teachers need systems for self-assessment and for connecting to fellow teachers. Now, this came from the keynote address that Andreas gave in Seoul in South Korea in October 2019, once again, before the pandemic. But you can see already those points that then became reality. Teachers in the virtual or hybrid environment did become teachers. They had to take ownership of their own learning. There wasn't time to have a structured program of development in place for those teachers to get those skills. Also, their way of working with children had to fundamentally change. And it's in this context that the work we've done in TiLL and this conference is framed. And so the project, Teachers Inspiring Lifelong Learning, was focused on the development of a lifelong learning qualification for teachers that could both be something that they could self-assess, but also ultimately could be something that could be used to be acknowledged or be accredited, or at least be recognized as a qualification that teachers desired and wanted to have. As I mentioned, it was very timely. We're at the end of our research, but this research in some ways predicted many of the things that we've seen that has happened over the last few months and years. And it's very much aligned to a lot of agendas that are being looked at. For example, if we look at the Council's conclusions on European teachers and teacher training in the future, and this came out in May 2020, so this year, earlier this year, there were so many points that aligned to the sorts of work we've been doing. So first of all, the need to update the competencies of teachers and trainers, that perhaps there's a disconnect between the sort of instruction they're getting and the sort of learning and development teachers really need. The necessity to work on a cross-border mobility. Now, this says a European mobility, but we really want to look at a global teaching workforce. And although there's been aspirations for more than a decade to have people who would be able to work across borders, when we looked, and I'll talk about this in more detail, when Anne from Sweden conducted a very detailed study of teacher training requirements, they are very much tied to a particular place, even a particular region. I'm speaking from London, and even in the UK, there are different requirements if you're in Northern Ireland, if you're in Wales, if you're in Scotland. So even within in the nation, we cannot agree the same set of requirements for teachers. We see a general trend towards micro-credentials. How might they operate in this space? How could we establish a teacher training academy that may operate across countries? And we have in the meeting today, Dame Alison Peacock, who'll be joining us in the roundtable, who's very interested in this notion of a chartered teacher status, a sort of recognition globally of what it means to be a teacher who's committed to their own lifelong learning. Promoting collaborative learning communities where we could exchange. And we've seen this emerge in the last few months, perhaps out of desperation from teachers, but they have shared more than they've ever shared before. Differentiation of the teacher career, and also the integration of a closer connection between what happens in education and the broader European Social Fund goals, especially around teacher education. How we've looked at this within TiLL is in a sort of tripartite way. So we've looked at this across 3 areas. So we began by looking at what's the current state of things. We looked across every European member state in terms of what happens in pre-training and what happens in continuing professional learning. We tried to distill then from that process, what are the key elements that every country desires of their teachers? And these became part of a core framework of competencies that we felt teachers now and in the future needed, and where there was a lot of agreement. We tested that framework because we wanted to see if there's if it worked, if there were things missing, if there were areas we needed to investigate further. And then ultimately, we used that framework to develop an online tool that also has been tested extensively to see whether it's appropriate, and will be fed back into this reporting again, and modifications and changes and further development of the framework. And at the heart of that is this idea of teachers becoming inspirers of lifelong learners. The work to date has had, through the pilot testing, has had a lot of impacts. On children, it seems that it's very important, if they are going to become lifelong learners, that their teachers become models of lifelong learners. For the teachers, it seems to be something that really increases their own personal value and their feelings of fulfillment as a teacher, and also their commitment to becoming learners themselves and to continue learners. And I think that the really key thing has been this notion of not just CPD, or not just continued professional development and learning, but personalized continuing professional development and learning, so that each teacher would have a personalized track of learning that they would follow. For the schools, there were benefits around encouraging professional dialogue. Teachers spoke to us about being the first time they'd had to talk, or being able to talk about their own professional development, not in pedagogy, but in the way they are as a professional teacher, their personal journey of learning. And it also was seen that it could benefit recruitment and retention. For the system, we think it's affordable, flexible, and scalable. And this is not a marketing. It's simply we needed to have something that would be relatively inexpensive and easy for systems to adopt, and also that would be able to mix with the policies and practices already existing in countries. It covered a whole range of issues, and there will be these issues and more that will come out in our conversation today. the ethics of teachers engaged in self-assessment or being accredited, the needs of teachers, the competencies that are important. Is this informal learning or formal learning? These sorts of questions came out during the research. This is just a very quick visual summary, and I'm sure they'll come out in our discussions today. We're also considering today some of the future development of this work. So can this be something that we can ensure is embedded as part of people's personalized learning journey? Are there things we would need to change? Would teachers need more information to understand this? How would we make it a tool that is really valuable? It has to be useful to the teachers. Could this change teachers' aspirations for themselves and for their pupils? What could be the effect on their well-being? How might these competencies be adapted into teaching and learning methodologies in the classroom? How might it change the way we look at how teachers acquire these competencies, either before starting in practice or in the classrooms? And could we actually open this up? Perhaps students themselves, the pupils, could become co-producers of these competencies for the future. These are some of the things that have been informing our thinking and the way we're looking.